Hello everyone, this is a bit of a different video than you're used to because I'm lucky enough to be joined by Marc Priestley, ex-chief mechanic?
Number one mechanic,
Number one mechanic.
Yeah. What's up, guys?
At McLaren. You might recognise him from his own channel, very popular on YouTube. I'll link to it in the description. We've got launch and testing season coming up right about now. So we thought it'd be a good opportunity to discuss new cars that are going to be coming out, what to expect, what to look for, and just a little chat about the season ahead. So
exciting times, isn't it?
Yeah, so hi Mark.
Hi.
You've been behind the scenes when launching cars, testing cars. Yeah, so it's an interesting time for an F1 team because you're trying to learn as much as possible. Let's talk about maybe testing.
Yeah.
Because actually launching a car these days isn't so much of a car launch because a lot of the stuff that they display to the public is hidden.
That's right. The car launches used to be a massive event. You know, it used to be a huge event where they would, I mean, it cost millions for the old car launches, which I always used to find crazy at the time. Nowadays, I guess lots of them are just done online, aren't they? But in terms of testing, yeah, it's a huge point because that is the point that every Formula One team is focused upon right from the point when you start the design work for your new car. Everything kind of works back from the first day that it has to run, which is the first test day. So even when, you know, midway through, or in fact the early part of 2018, when the team started looking at 2019's regulations, and it was all focused on this point where the cars are about to run at Barcelona. So everybody's been focusing on that. All the workload that's going on is focused on that. And for the teams, when it finally gets to this point in time, when we get to roll the car out of the garage, it's not only it's a relief because, you know, you've done so much work, but it's all been focused in a factory, but it's also quite a nervous moment because there's so much pressure, there's so much expectation everywhere, both within your team, but also from the fans and the public. And yet no one really knows how well it's going to do up against the opposition because everyone's got their own thing going on.
Well, quite. And we've got some new regulations coming up this year, not too dramatic ones, but enough to worry a few engineers. So let's talk a little bit about maybe what's been happening in the team up to the point where they get the car on track for launches. There's been dyno work. A lot of teams now can do some very, very physical simulations to make the car feel like it's been running.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the factories now are so well equipped. They've got, I mean, a lot of it actually is in the virtual world now, isn't it? So you've got lots of simulation in terms of CFD, computational fluid dynamics, where they're able to very, very accurately simulate most conditions now that a car will operate in. They can start to make changes in the virtual world before they have to actually manufacture any components. So it saves a lot of time and effort, whereas in the past we would, you know, maybe make 10 different front wings and just try them all. Well, now we don't have to do that because we can virtually sort of digitally make them, if you like, test them all out and see which one works. So things have changed in the way that Formula One teams operate drastically, but they do also have lots of physical equipment going on with things like dynos, like say brake dynos, where they can run brake discs at the incredible speeds and temperatures that they'll get to. They still use wind tunnels, of course. Wind tunnels are still a huge part of a Formula One team's development, where a model making department will be making models, 60% scale models of the exact car, and they're so detailed. I mean, they're amazing bits of kit if you've ever get the chance to see one, because you don't see a 60% scale Formula One car. It's a really weird thing to kind of see, but a beautiful part, you know, literally a work of art. So those things are running in a wind tunnel to try and I guess to try and sort of corroborate the data they've had from CFD to make sure it works in the wind tunnel. And then the next phase, of course, is to take that wind tunnel model, scale it up to a full-size car, put it on a racetrack, and see if all the data and all the information you've been learning over the winter and over the development process, whether it actually translates into the real world. And that's the bit that's most nervous for everybody.
Yeah, I can imagine. And of course, there's only 8 track days before they get to go to free practice 1 in Australia. An awful lot to test on the car. How do teams approach programs like that to make sure they get as much information as possible from as little running?
Well, they have
allowed?
And it is a tiny amount of running, really, certainly compared to what we used to have, where
just
testing,
one car, of course, at a time.
That's right. So much to learn in a short space of time. So to do that, you have to have a very detailed run plan, and the run plan will be generated by all the departments within the Formula One team. So an aero department will have everything they want to achieve from the test. There's also the suspension departments, the engine departments, power units. Everybody's got their own agenda, and so the overall engineering team has to kind of get all of those agendas together, put them onto a piece of paper, trying to work out what's achievable. And of course, so you set out this run plan where it might say in the morning of day one, you'll do an installation lap, which is just a single lap, exploratory lap. And then, of course, the car will come in and bodywork will come off and they'll look for problems. And of course, at that point, you don't know if you're going to find any problems. So your run plan can say what it likes. But of course, the actual testing, when you put a car on track, things do go wrong. And everything at that point, the run plan has to change dramatically. So, there'll be points where the aero department will have a section of time in a day. So maybe a couple of hours will be dedicated just to aero, or the tyre department will have the same thing. So they'll be set out a section of runs that might be kind of 10, 20 lap runs, for example, where they're doing back-to-back tyre testing, and that time will be focused solely on understanding how the tyres are performing, monitoring the temperatures of the tyres, the wear rates, pressures, all those kind of things. In the background, of course, everything else is getting mileage, and that's super important as well. But it's all about finding out, every department's competing against each other, if you like, to try and grab some time within those 8 days of testing. And it's a balancing act of finding out, of trying to appease everybody in the factory with not very much runtime. And if you have problems, that runtime gets drastically reduced even further.
It certainly does. So you talk about, obviously, focusing runs on a certain aspect of the car, be it tyres or wash off the front wing or whatever. And as people may know, when you test things, you kind of tend to want to change one variable at a time, so you know what's causing differences. But with the many different components of the car, are there runs you can do where you can be testing multiple parts of the car if you're clever about it? Are there programs that allow you to test wings plus suspension?
Yeah, of course. I mean, there are. If you're doing performance runs, there's a big difference here, because testing is as much about proving reliability of your car, as much as it is about trying to get performance from it. The early part of test, and certainly the first of the two tests, will be massively focused on reliability. And that means making sure you achieve sign-off mileages. So every component will have a sign-off mileage before it's then allowed to go racing, if you like. So it'll be all about trying to achieve those mileages, and in that situation you can tick every box at once, because it's about pounding around, putting the car through the kind of the situations that it will find itself in over a Grand Prix weekend, and just trying to keep the thing going at speed and at different in different conditions. Then as you move into week 2, it's really going to start focusing much more on performance, and at that point you have to narrow down your focus, and that's when it might come down to aero, for example. If you're doing back-to-back tests on wings, you can't then start playing about with suspension, because you're not creating like-for-like conditions to get a real back-to-back reading on the wing, for example, or whatever it is. So the performance side of testing is much more focused than the kind of longevity side or the reliability side, which is a bit more open and generally just about getting mileage.
And obviously another restriction of these pre-season tests are, they're just at Barcelona in February. But I imagine teams want to at least attempt to have an understanding of what a car might be like in Bahrain, in Monaco, in a Monza-like situation. How much can you get information about how your car might perform across different tracks?
I mean, it's one of these age-old questions, particularly around temperature, because Barcelona in February can be pretty cold. I mean, we had snow there last year, didn't we?
You did. Very different to the actual conditions we got when we raced there.
Exactly. So there's very little you can do in terms of real-world simulating a different racetrack, but what you can do is get a baseline set of data, which then the CFD systems and the simulation systems can then extrapolate that data and kind of transform that to give you an idea of what you'll find at other places and other temperatures and things like that. But it is just very difficult, and the reason we do it, of course, is to try and save money. There's a real argument to say we should be going somewhere like the Middle East. Most races are in the hotter conditions, and So to be in the freezing cold where you might even lose time like we did last year because of the snow is incredibly frustrating for the teams, but it's much cheaper than trying to ship everything out, over a long...
like we did a couple of years ago.
Exactly. I mean, I remember spending 2 weeks in Bahrain pre-season, just pounding around, but you did it. You because it was guaranteed sunshine and pretty stable temperatures. We probably learnt a huge amount more. But the cost of that was astronomical for all the teams to ship everything out for that period of time. So it's a real balancing act, and I don't know what the exact answer is. Perhaps it's a case of everybody... We used to go to Kyalami on the way to the first race in South Africa.
Wow.
It was kind of halfway there. So that kind of thing works, but you also want to be quite close to your factory. Barcelona is relatively close, so you'll find over the course of the testing 2 weeks that every single day there are vans turning up at the racetrack just full of new components, because the supply and the development rate is so great that lots of the parts that people want to run in testing, even as we stand now, just a few days away from the first test, haven't even been made yet. So they'll be constantly turning up overnight. So that's one of the reasons we have to be pretty close to the European base of most of the teams.
Maybe you can wear two heads for this one. As someone who both worked for McLaren on the sort of engineering side, and as now a fan, a pundit, someone from the outside, how do you feel about this severely restricted testing we've had in the last probably decade or so now?
Well, I understand it. I obviously understand it, because when I was first at McLaren, I joined McLaren in 2000, where testing was almost unrestricted. When I was on the test team, we had a separate test team at that point. We had our own cars, we had our own trucks and all our own equipment separate to the race team, and all we did was go testing every week.
Yeah. I used to sometimes go because it was free. You could turn up to Silverstone, just watch some cars testing and go home.
There you go, the days of anything being free. And that in that point in time, the development was incredible. But as I said to you before, things have moved on in terms of technology where we don't really need to do that as much because of kind of virtual world simulation, and it's so accurate now. We can get a lot of that work done back in our factory, which does save time, it saves money. It's expensive to put a race car on a racetrack. But on the other hand, it's more time with a car on a racetrack, which is what I love and what most of the teams love. It's what the drivers love. One of the big points here is that the things you miss out for not having cars on a racetrack, you don't get drivers in them as much. So drivers generally have much less seat time, and that can affect younger drivers, getting opportunities. But also for engineers, engineers, to get real world experience, need to have a car at a racetrack and go through that process as well. So
it's a very good point that you don't often hear spoken about.
Well, it's if you're training up young engineers, the test team used to be the place to do it, just like you did with young drivers. And now we've lost that opportunity. It's much harder to give those engineers the kind of experience they need before they actually go racing. So again, almost the engineering side is happening in the virtual world as well as the driving side.
That's actually quite fascinating, and I'm sure there are a lot of programs running behind the scenes to just make sure people are ready once they actually are able to get their boots on the ground. But
you can only do it to a certain point, because you can't substitute real world experience for anything really. You can give them a great build up in the virtual world, in the simulation side, but nothing really replaces actually being there in the pit lane, doing it under the pressure that comes with that.
So another thing, we've spoken about CFD, wind tunnels, simulations that go on behind the scenes, but another thing that happens a lot are driver simulators, which you've been away from the inside for a little while, but even in that time it's probably come on leaps and bounds. But how good are driver simulator rigs at preparing both the team and the driver for what they expect to happen on track?
I think more beneficial to the team than the driver, if I'm honest, because the quality of the data that the teams can input into those systems is now so good that, for example, you can change an anti-roll bar in the simulation program, and the effect that it gives you, in that simulator is so accurate now as to what would happen when you change it on the real car, that teams genuinely make setup decisions at the racetrack based on what's going on in the simulator. Even when I was doing this a few years ago, I don't think we'd have ever had that amount of trust in it. It gave you an idea, but then you'd go and try that idea on the racetrack. Well, now we don't even need to do that. We just believe what the simulator says because it's so accurate. In terms of drivers, I think there's benefit to learning a new track. Perhaps it gives you an idea, things like Formula E, where they're constantly going to new racetracks.
Yeah.
The simulator is incredibly important for that. But I think with a top-level racing driver, it gives them an idea of what to expect at a racetrack, but the reality is that within 4 or 5 laps of any track, they all know it anyway. And I think actually when you talk to most Formula 1 drivers, they don't see that as any substitute for actually being in a real car. So I think it has limited use for a driver, but actually really valuable use for a team.
Maybe just to sort of finish off, get a little bit more specific. We've got some new aero rules coming in this year. They were brought in, not going to say hastily, but they brought in quite quickly once. Last year's Australian Grand Prix was a little bit lacking in action.
That's right. Excuse us, we're just climbing up a mountain here, which is why we're both out of breath.
And there's a bush in front of it. Okay, so I'm gonna muscle up. Try not to hit you in the face with that.
Brought you through the most tricky terrain possible to be filming on.
YouTubers can exert themselves as well. Right, so we've got new front wing, some revised rules around barge boards, brake ducts, and a rear wing effectively changed to increase the efficacy of DRS.
Yeah.
So, really 2 questions around that. The first, what are your initial thoughts about how much that's going to change the action on track? And the second, is this an opportunity for a team that's a bit further down the order to steal a march by exploiting a subset of the rules and finding a way?
Yeah. So in terms of what effect it will have on the racing, and let's not forget this, as you said there, this was brought in as a change specifically to try and improve the racing, and specifically to try and improve the ability of a car to follow closely a car in front and therefore have an opportunity to overtake. And all the simulations are showing that it will do something in that area. It will certainly allow a car to perhaps follow a little bit more closely, with less effect from the turbulent wake of the car in front. Is that going to improve overtaking? I'm actually not sure that specifically will. What I think will improve overtaking, and this is then open to debate as to whether it's a good thing or not, is the massive now effect of DRS. So the rear wing is much bigger and much deeper than it used to be, and the DRS flap itself is 20mm deeper. So with the rear wing being higher and in cleaner stream air, the rear wing itself kind of generates more drag. But that means that the DRS flap, now being bigger as well, dumps more drag when it's operated. So effectively, if you're following a car and you flip your DRS, you should be able to have a relatively easy catapult forward and past the car in front of you. So then it opens up the question, is this what we want? Is this how we want overtaking to happen? And I think what's going to be really interesting this year is that some circuits, even last year we saw that some circuits potentially didn't really need DRS, and yet we had it. If we've now got it in much more powerful effect, are we going to see people potentially coming onto a long straight into the DRS zone, not even wanting to be the car in front at that point because they know they're going to get swallowed up? So I think there's still a few unanswered questions in that, but I think generally it could be a good rule change. I think this is not something that's too dramatic or controversial. The DRS thing perhaps is the only thing. Will it improve the racing? I don't know, but I think it's a stepping stone towards where we're probably going to end up in 2021. And you touched on the idea of, will it allow an opportunity for some of the smaller teams to exploit some rules? Well, every rule change definitely gives an opportunity, but what they have done this time, more so than I've ever seen before, is be so restrictive in how they've written these rules. They got the teams very much involved in writing those rules, to the point where they've all got together and tried to, make sure there's no loopholes left. And that doesn't normally happen. So the front wing, for example, particularly around the end plate, is so restrictive, it's almost a spec part. You're going to see lots of teams spending a lot of money designing, manufacturing their own front wing end plates, but I'm pretty sure they're all going to look the same.
Yeah.
Which is, then opens the question, should we just be giving them a spec part and saving some money? But there's definite opportunities, and I imagine that over the course of testing and the early part of the season, that's when we'll start to see the development race really ramping up, as you always get with new cars and new rule sets, is that gradually people will start to find areas that they might be able to improve, and they might only be tiny. But you know, that's Formula One. That's what I love about Formula One. They spend so much effort looking for tiny advantages, you know, constantly trying to improve things.
From an engineering and physics or whatever perspective, it's fascinating to watch people find those loopholes and those little advances they can exploit.
Yeah.
And again, that is the thing I love about F1, and F1 itself is a big contradiction, because we want it to be an open formula where people can design and develop the cars, but not being a spec formula comes with a lot of problems of its own that
That's right.
it's been spending the last 20 years trying to get on top of.
Yeah, exactly.
Where right now DRS seems to be the best solution they've got to solve what's come out of aerodynamics, which are huge vortices and wakes.
That's right. And it's you know, what we've done with this rule change is we haven't eliminated that problem, if you see it as a problem. We're trying to minimise it. It's still going to be a problem. And as you say, DRS is almost like a band-aid to sort of temporarily fix that. And I guess we all hope that for 2021, where they have this opportunity to really rewrite the whole rule book, with people like Ross Brawn and Pat Simmons and co, very clever, very intelligent people, looking at this big rule change, then they've got the right people, they've got the right opportunity. Let's hope they can really rewrite it so that we end up eradicating some of these problems that we already know so much about.
And what FIA and Formula One have done is allowed teams to use unlimited CFD and wind tunnel testing to solve these problems, whereas right now, on their current developments, they are restricted in hours. So
that's right.
I mean, I feel like you, I'm feeling more optimistic than I have done in years that we'll finally get on top of these problems in a way that's not antithetical to Formula One.
Yeah, I think we've had a lot of knee-jerk reactions in Formula One over the last few years, haven't we, for various reasons, and perhaps you could say the 2019 change was a knee-jerk reaction, as you touched on there, to the Australian Grand Prix of last year. But at least we were sort of heading that way anyway with the 2021 rules. And now at least it looks like we've set this target of 2021. It's a long period of time when they started looking at this, a decent amount of time. As I say, they're building a very kind of capable team to do it. So it kind of looks like they're doing everything right.
Yeah.
And I think we've all got to just, you know, we keep our fingers crossed, but we've all just got to kind of let them get on with it. And you know, it's amazing looking at opinions online. Everybody's got an opinion of what we should be doing. You know, the amount of people I say, why don't they just get rid of wings and put ground effects, you know, side skirts on the cars? And there are so many opinions, but you've all got to trust, everybody's got to trust that the people, you know, at Liberty, Ross Brawn, at FOM, they are all looking into everything. They're not just kind of ignoring everybody. They're not kind of, you know, got an idea and just running with it. They're looking into every option. And crucially, like you said there, they're getting the teams involved. Nobody knows these things better than the teams and the engineers at the teams. So to have them on board and to get them to sign up to kind of pushing this development through, I think is a really big step forward for F1.
Well, I'm glad you feel as positive as I do about F1 going forward. Mark, it's been a pleasure chatting with you about this.
Thanks for coming on my dog walk with me.
Yeah, you should actually check out Mark's channel as well. He does a lot of great stuff and kind of similar to mine, sort of some explanations, some inside stories. I'll put a link in the description, and you can also look forward to a conversation he has with me on his channel.
Coming very soon.
In the next few weeks or so, if I can control his camera. Okay, that's it for now. I'll see you in the next video.